I'd love to hear you pray, Karina, wherever she is, in French. She speaks fluent French, as does her husband as well. And she received her bachelor's degree in French from Carson Newman College in Jefferson City, Tennessee. And during her time there, she did a semester in missions at a university that I'm not going to try to pronounce, but I'll let you pronounce it, in Morocco. Wow. And also attended La Sorbonne, is that right? In Paris, France, to begin her master's degree in French literature. And I understand that she is a voracious reader. Is that right? I was asking her where she was reading in Scripture, and she just finished Deuteronomy and really got a lot of life out of that, and is loving Joshua as well. And we started a great Bible study on Wednesday in 2 Timothy. And so would you please welcome our new worship pastor. God bless you. Thanks for that.
All right, good morning, everybody. Today I just wanted to give you a chance to hear my testimony since I'm coming from out of the state. We're just moving here from Florida. My husband is a pilot for SkyWest Airlines, and he was stationed at SFO here. And so that's what's bringing us over to the West Coast. So I haven't gotten the chance to meet a lot of you, and I'm just super overwhelmed with gratitude to have the opportunity to lead you in worship, and want to get to know each of you really in depth. So I'm planning on attending several different groups here at the church so I can get a chance to meet you. But I feel like sharing my testimony with you would give you a big insight into what God's done in my life. So I just want to start off this morning with Psalm 139, verses 7 through 12. It says, "Where can I go from your spirit? Where can I flee from your presence? If I go up to the heavens, you're there. If I make my bed in the depths, you're there. If I rise on the wings of the dawn, if I settle on the far side of the sea, even there your hand will guide me, your right hand will hold me fast. If I say, surely the darkness will hide me, and the light will become night around me, even the darkness will not be dark to you. The night will shine like the day, for darkness is as light to you." The whole beginning of my life was darkness. My mother left home at the age of 13 and joined the Jim Jones cult. She lived with them until she was 19 years old. Thankfully, she was kidnapped by the FBI and deprogrammed right before they went to South America. For those of you who are unfamiliar with Jim Jones, it was a cult that is infamous for everybody committing mass suicide. They drink poison Kool-Aid, the adults, the children, everyone. And my mom was in that group for 6 years, living in the woods all across America. When she left, she was very confused, as you can imagine, and wanted to join the Army as a nurse. And within a few months of her joining that group, she was actually raped and discovered that she was pregnant with me. Her parents asked her to abort me. Her parents are atheist and very independent thinkers. My grandfather is a college literature professor, and my grandmother is a concert pianist, and they're just very intellectual, atheistic people. And so for them, of course you would have an abortion. Why would you not do that? And for some reason, my mother refused. So she had to go live in a home for unwed mothers in Boston, Massachusetts, where I was born. And her life, and my life consequently, from my birth until the age of 12, was a series of horrors, really. She was chasing love, chasing meaning and trying to find that through relationships with men. And unfortunately, she was continuously falling into the same sorts of relationships with very dangerous, very unhealthy men who hurt her, who hurt me. And to run away from that, each time she got into a negative relationship, she would move across the country. So by the time I was 12, I had already lived in 50 different cities. And most of the time we just lived in hotels, short-term temporary housing, because she had horrible credit and horrible renter history. And so, most of the time we were in those sort of, motels that you see, not very attractive places. And that's where I pretty much spent the first 12 years of my life. And the end of my 8th grade year, my mother wanted to move again, and I told her, I just can't do this life anymore. So if you move, you're going to have to move without me. And she did. She left. So I moved in with a girl who was in my school, stayed there for a month before her parents kicked me out. And then I lived in a squatting house. A squatting house is an abandoned house. And there was a group of runaway teenagers who were living there. And there were about 20 of us living in a 3-bedroom home without electricity or running water. And we just would go to soup kitchens and pick up food, and we'd all share it together. But most of us were users, and all of us were sexually active already. A lot of the people there were involved very, very heavily in the occult. And so it was just a very, very, very dark period in my life. I then didn't feel comfortable living those conditions, and a cocaine dealer invited me to come live with him. And so I moved in with him, and I stayed with him until I was 17 years old. It was then, in 1994, that God rocked my world. Some friends had invited me to a rave, which is an illegal underground party where people go and usually will use drugs and dance to, at that time period, it was techno. And so it was being held in an abandoned warehouse in downtown Dallas, Texas. And so I went there, and I was very, very upset. My whole life up until that point, starting at a very young age, very young, 2-3 years old, I was already filled with a very, very high amount of anger. I was really jealous. I didn't understand why other people that I saw out in the world appeared to have normal lives. Why is it that they seem to have a mom and a dad and a brother and a sister and a house and a dog and a car, and they just stayed where they lived and went to school every day and just seemed to have normal lives? I was very jealous, and that jealousy created a very strong bitterness in me towards everyone. And therefore, throughout my whole life, I was very angry and very violent. In 3rd grade, I broke my teacher's arm. In Head Start, even before preschool, I was kicked out for just my rebellious attitude towards the teachers there. I didn't know. I didn't have proper parents to teach me what normalcy was, and so, I just kind of think of myself as I was like a wild animal. I really had not been trained in what was, but that anger just had reached a pinnacle when I'd been invited to this rave. So that evening I had been proposed a very large number of drugs, and I was so upset. I was like, I'm just going to take them all. And so that evening I had a drug overdose. And through that drug overdose, I actually was paralyzed. And while I was there lying on the floor, they had psychedelic images on the wall of the warehouse. I was looking at the images. I couldn't move, but I could see what was up there. And I actually saw Satan's face. And he looked at me and said, "I'm going to kill you." I was terrified. I'd grown up my whole life an atheist. I've never been to church in my whole life. I've never read the Bible in my entire life. I'd never thought about God or the devil or anything at all. And so here's this terrifying face telling me that it wants to kill me. Miraculously, I woke up 2 days later back at the man's house, the cocaine dealer, and I went to school. I went to school. I had to go to school. So I went to school, and I was totally terrified. I was like, oh my gosh, what just happened to me? I can't even believe I'm alive. Am I really alive? What's going on right now? I'm walking down the hallways of the school, and as a result of the drugs that I had taken that weekend, everything was kind of surreal and very vibrant. I could hear everything more than normal, see everything more than normal. And I was listening to the kids in the hallway. Oh, my boyfriend just broke with me. Oh my gosh, we have a test this Friday. Oh, can you believe she said that? You know, teenagers. Sorry. I love y'all. So as I was walking down the hallway, I just was overwhelmed with the futility of life. I thought, none of this matters. None of this matters. Why do we even come here? Everything is pointless and meaningless. For my own self, I was like, why have I not just ended my life already? My life has been so full of pain and suffering these past 17 years. Why don't I just end it? Why have I put up with this high amount of pain and suffering all this time? And I arrived in my chemistry class, and the teacher was talking about something very heavy in chemistry. I couldn't stand it, so I went outside, and it was this perfect day. Blue sky, no wind, green grass. I picked up a blade of grass, and I was just overwhelmed. I'm thinking, look how beautiful this is. If one atom, if one electron, if one molecule was just the slightest bit different, none of this would be. The level of perfection in the universe was revealing to me there must be some point. Why would we be here? Is it true that all this was just an accident? This molecule just happened to bump into this molecule, and therefore, whoop, here we are. Well, if that's true, why is there this level of beauty? Is it necessary? I mean, then everything should be utilitarian. Why is this green so beautiful? Why is that sky so blue? It's just so beautiful. Why do we have love? Why do we have friendship? Why do we have music? Why do we have beautiful paintings and art and sculpture and architecture? Why is there that beauty in the universe if it's meaningless, if it's for nothing? And so then I set out, I said, there's got to be something. And whatever it is, it must not only have a purpose, but it must be beautiful and good in nature to have this sort of beauty and order to the universe. So I went out that week and I just started asking everyone I saw, are you happy? If you're happy, tell me why. What is your purpose? Please tell me, what do you think you're here for? And I just started interviewing people. I started reading, talk about voracious reading. I was a voracious reader that weekend. But then on this other flip side of that, I was still terrified by that face that I had seen. I'm going to kill you. I could not sleep at all that week. I was so terrified, I literally just kept vomiting because I was so scared and anxious and frightened. Then one night, November 18th, 1994, around 3 o'clock in the morning, God literally spoke to me and said, I want you to read the book of John. Now, I've never read the Bible in my whole life. I didn't even know there was a book of John, and I do not have a Bible, and I'm in a cocaine dealer's house, so the chances of there being a Bible in there are pretty slow. But his mother was actually sleeping in the living room on the couch that day. So I went out there, 3 o'clock in the morning. Excuse me. Now, let me describe myself also. I was a goth, okay? So my hair was shaved and dyed black. I had black eyeshadow, black lipstick, black fingernail polish, the dog chains, boots, fishnet black. today, I guess that would be emo. So not the kind of person who's going to go ask for a Bible, right? So I walk out in the living room and I'm like, excuse me, I know it's like 3 o'clock in the morning, but do you have a Bible? She's like, what are you saying? I'm like, do you have a Bible? She's like, a Bible? I'm like, shh, yes. She's like, I think so. She found one of those microscopic Bibles, those teeny New Testaments. And I'm like, thank you. So I'm like, table of contents. Is there a book of John? No idea. So I find the book of John. The book of John, chapter 1 says, in the beginning was the Word. The Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was with God in the beginning. Through him, all things were made. Without him, nothing was made that has been made. In him was life, and that life was the light of all mankind. And somehow, supernaturally, God just poured out peace on me to understand the origin and the meaning of the universe. Just in those few verses, he didn't have to come and give me diagrams of how he did it all. Just in those verses, all I needed to know was he made it. He's in control, and he's good. But the next verse, this is where he got me, verse 5. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not, cannot, will never overcome it. And this is where the Spirit of God literally and supernaturally invaded me. I had been physically abused. I'd been sexually abused, psychologically abused, abandoned, rejected. I had hurt other people. I was full of sin, and I had been sinned upon. I was full of anger and violence and bitterness and unforgiveness, and his light totally invaded me. The light cannot, will not overcome it, never ever, cannot. The darkness cannot overcome his light. There is no one in this room who is too far in the dark that you cannot be saved. There's no one in this room who has sinned too much that God cannot and doesn't want to and desires and has passion to forgive you. There's no one in this room who's been hurt so much that you can't be healed. There's no one whose childhood was too broken that God can't bring you back. There's no one too far out, weird, broken, confused, and wild that God can't tame you and teach you what is healthy and teach you what is normal and teach you what is good. And he gave me a family, a husband, and 2 children, and he's taught me how to be a good mother to them and to be a good wife when I had no model to see my whole growing up. There's nothing. 2 Corinthians 5:17, my favorite verse in the whole Bible. If anyone is in Christ, the new creation has come. The old is gone and the new is here. When I woke up the next morning, November 19th, I was somebody totally different. I never did another drug again in my whole life. I went to school that day. All my friends were like, hey. Back then, my name was Corey. So they were, hey, Corey, you want to go get high? Because we'd always get high before school during lunch. And that's another God story. I've got a million God stories. Somehow, God gave me a 3.5 in spite of my lifestyle, which enabled me to go to college. Thank you, Jesus. But they're like, hey, Corey, you want to? And I was just, you know what? The craziest thing in the whole world, but I met God last night, so no. And I'm actually really thankful God changed me in November, because then my classmates got to see the transformation occur over the end of that year. And through the end of that year, that's when God called me to be a foreign missionary. So I got a chance to go to Mexico that year as a missionary. Then later I went to Morocco to Al Ain University. And then I went to Mali, West Africa, and then to France. One of the biggest works God did in my life, also there in John chapter 1, verses 12 and 13. Yet to all who did receive him, To those who believed in his name, he gave the right to become children of God, children born not of natural descent, nor of human decision or a husband's will, but born of God. As a child, product of a rape, and really not parented at all by my mother, one of the largest works God did in me is him becoming my father. He adopts us. And anybody in this room, it says, to all who did receive him, not some. It says the word all. To every single one of us who receive him into our hearts, he has adopted us. We're his children. And it doesn't matter what your human parents, even if your human parents are awesome, and I hope they are, but no matter what your human parents are like, God is your daddy. And he loves you with a passion and fire that cannot be compared to. I just want to end with two words. First of all, if there's anybody in here who has not yet said yes to Jesus, I just pray right now that today will be your day. My life is living proof that anybody can be changed and transformed and healed. And I also want to encourage the believers here today. There are Corys in your school. There are Corys in your family. There are Corys in your work. People who look so dark and scary. Let me tell you, if you'd seen me back then, you would have just walked right on by. Be like, she is one scary-looking girl. But I want to encourage you not to walk on by like the Pharisee did. I want to encourage you to run into the darkness with your light. You have a light. You are salt and light. I want to encourage you to go into the deepest, darkest depths. Isaiah 61 says, "The Spirit of the Sovereign Lord is upon me, because the Lord has anointed me." He's anointed you to proclaim good news to the poor. He sent you to bind up the brokenhearted, to proclaim freedom for the captives, and release darkness for the prisoners. If you're a believer here today, please do not be afraid of those people who are broken and dark and full of sin, because they need Jesus, and Jesus can transform them. So don't be afraid to get in there, get your hands dirty. Just shine your light and be salt. Thank you.
Thank you, Lord. The one thing that I'd say touched my heart so much when Karina shared this testimony with the elders, can you tell everyone that it was just a few days after you got saved, you walked into can you tell?
Yes.
That's really...
Yes. So, God supernaturally reached me, and unfortunately, there had been no Christian who had spoken to my life. But when I met God that night, that Sunday, I knew, okay, I need to go and join with some people who believe in God. So it's pretty funny. I could have ended up anywhere, but God brought me down the street to a Baptist church. And this is in Fort Worth, Texas. So if anybody's been to Fort Worth, Texas, Baptist means big poofy hair and floral dresses. I was a goth, so that's kind of not fitting very well together. I didn't realize it. I'm like walking down the street. Oh, right, I believe in God. I'm going to go check out the God thing. I walk in the door, and it's like, grrr. Everybody looks at me, and they're like, what is that? I'm like, oh, my gosh. It's the purple hairs, that dusty purple bouffant with the floral. Oh my gosh, everybody was looking at me, like literally everybody. And I was like, they're going to ask me to leave. I did not prepare myself for this. And this one lady in particular, she starts moving, and I'm like, she is for real going to ask me to leave. So I'm like trying to prepare myself. Okay, it's all right, whatever, shake it off. She's going to ask you to leave. You just go to the next place. She walks up to me. She was up in the front row. She walked all the way down the thing, staring at me. I'm like, oh my gosh. She comes up to me and she started crying. And she goes, I am so glad that you're here. Will you come and sit beside of me? And that church adopted me. And they did such an amazing job. First of all, being patient and gracious with me, because I really was like a wild feral cat, and they just needed to be, oh, Karina, okay, this is normal, this is not normal. And they just came beside me, and they'd invite me to their house for dinner, and there was fellowship dinner, and inviting me on trips, and just being so loving and kind and patient with me throughout that transformative time period. And so I just want to encourage you to really be that. When you see someone come here who maybe fits outside of your box, I pray that you would be the first person to go and shake their hand. Just let them know how thankful that they're here. Sit beside them on that Sunday. Invite them to lunch after church and make them feel welcome, because you just don't know where they're coming from. They get to be coming from a really, really hurt place. And God could be using you to adopt them into the family of Christ.
Thank you, sir. If you have your Bibles, if you'll turn with me to Matthew chapter 9. And I'm just going to go through verses 9 through 13 to end Karina's testimony with a real powerful passage to us, to cause us to become more mature, to cause us to have God's heart for everybody that we come into contact with. One woman came to Karina, and what she didn't mention is there was a young woman, 23 years old, I think it was, who was part of the seminary near there, probably Southern Baptist Theological Seminary. And she mentored Karina, 17 years old, and really all she did is took you through the whole Bible in 1 year. And now you love reading the Bible. See the connection there? And her life just continued to be changed. But what if that woman would have looked at the outward of Corey and said, I don't want anything to do with you? And what if she would have just seen Corey as a face, but not as a real human being, as someone mentioned last night? How many people do we walk by that are Karinas? How many thousands of Karinas are all around us? Or how many thousands of male Corys, if you will, are all around us? And maybe it's not just teenagers, but maybe it's people your age, my age, whatever age that you're at. Do we not live in an absolutely broken world? Yeah? Do we live in a broken world? Do we live in a world with one who can fix it? You've heard my testimony. I had a horrible upbringing, no real dad. I was always drunk. And yet when I became a Christian, God became my father. And so I know, Karina knows, and we've all got to continue to come to the place where we know that we know that we know that nothing is impossible with the God that we serve. There's no crevice, no corner in our hearts that He can't touch and redeem. He is the great Redeemer. He can redeem your marriage. He can redeem your attitude. He can redeem your anger issues. He can redeem whatever it is that you're going through. I'm not saying that we're going to be perfect this side of heaven. But what He's interested in is conforming us to becoming more like Jesus. And let me tell you, when we become more like Jesus, we are free. We are free. And that's what he wants. Christianity is a feast. It is not a funeral. And that's what we're going to see here in Matthew chapter 9. Yes, it is. Now, I'm not saying that we don't go through difficult times, but God even uses the difficult times to make us more like Jesus. I think he went through a few difficult times. Yeah? Matthew chapter 9 and verse 9, as Jesus went on from there, the context is he is in Capernaum. He saw a man called Matthew, also named Levi, sitting in the tax collector's booth, and Jesus said to him, "Follow me." And he got up and followed him. Now, tax collectors didn't just take 20% of your income, they were extortionists. There were 3 levels of tax collectors. Matthew was the worst of all. Matthew became very wealthy because not only did he take his cut for the Roman government, by the way, Matthew was Jewish, so of all the people in the land of Israel, Matthew was hated more than anyone because he came not only and took what was required for him to take for the Roman government, then he took another cut for himself. He was like a gangster. Really. So you can imagine how despised tax collectors were. They were ostracized from society. The Pharisees would not even talk to them. They would not allow any socialization. They would not be allowed in synagogue or in the temple. These were social outcasts. That'll give us a little bit of background for what's about to happen. Then it happened in verse 10 that as Jesus was reclining at the table in the house, that is in Matthew's house, behold, Matthew says, many tax collectors and sinners. That word sinners means this is the dregs of society. These are the worst of the worst of the worst. Luke tells us that Matthew threw a party for them. And here comes Jesus with the worst of the worst, the ugliest of the ugliest, that is, spiritually speaking. And they were dining with Jesus and his disciples. And when the Pharisees, verse 11, when the Pharisees saw this, now how did they see it? They had to have been watching. They had to have been standing on the corner somewhere. The religious police, they watched everything that Jesus and his disciples did. What were they trying to do? They were trying to kill Jesus. So they're watching. They're planning, they're scheming. And they see him go into this house. It's a house of ill repute. It's a house where people in today's society, they would have been ravers, right? A lot of them. And the tax collectors would have been providing them the money to be able to do that. Well, they don't go to Jesus. They go to the disciples. And I don't think they ask the question, excuse me, I don't really want to bother you, but why is your teacher eating with the tax collectors and sinners? I don't want to offend you by asking that question. No, I don't think they asked it that way. How do you think they asked that question? Why is it that your teacher is eating with tax collectors and sinners? It had to have been the way they asked the question. Talk about anger coming out of their hearts. But when Jesus heard this, can you imagine Jesus hearing this? He said, "It is not those who are healthy who need a physician, but those who are sick." And then he says, "Go and learn." This is not a suggestion. It is a command. Go and learn what this means. And he quotes from Hosea chapter 6, verse 6. Why do you think he quoted from Hosea 6, verse 6? What's the book of Hosea all about? Read Hosea. God calls a prophet to marry a prostitute to make a declaration to Israel that you are acting like prostitutes before me. And Hosea reveals the radical love for Israel that God has for the nation. Those Pharisees knew this verse by heart. They knew exactly where it came from. And so Jesus quotes, I desire compassion and not sacrifice, for I did not come to call the righteous, but sinners. It's very easy for all of us, myself included. I find the longer that we walk with the Lord, how easy it is for us to become like Pharisees. Have you ever found yourself becoming Pharisaical? Self-righteous? Indignant? Having no compassion on others? Not wanting to be bothered with others? Judging people when you don't know their motive? I love God. And then I turn around and kill people with my words. Isn't that Pharisaical? Beloved, wouldn't you rather live with freedom in your heart? Purity in your heart? I think if you've walked with the Lord for any length of time, that Phariseeism has that leaven that Jesus warned about. Beware of the leaven of the Pharisees, which is hypocrisy. It seeps into us. All the more reason why I need to be close to God. Kevin, would you stand with me? Just face that way. Kevin represents Jesus, and Jesus has a robe, and all I know is that I can't see what he really wants me to see if I'm not holding on to him. So Kevin, you go wherever you want to go. Now the minute I take my hands off him, I'm going to go, hey Dave, how's it going? How's it going, Shanda? And then Dave's like, hey, let's go do, whatever. And I'm like, whoa, where's Jesus? Where's Jesus? Oh, do you see how we need to hold on to the hem of his garments every second of every day? But there's so much freedom. And when I'm holding on to the hem of his garments, I can partner with him to walk in my destiny, to see others changed and transformed, like that older woman in Fort Worth, Texas, that partnered with this 17-year-old girl, and that 17-year-old girl's life will never be the same, and her 2 boys will be raised in a healthy home, and her wonderful husband. And just think of what the fruit is that is going to develop in their lives and come out of their lives in this church, because one woman did not have the heart of a Pharisee. And one young seminarian said, I'll get together with you and just read the Bible. You see, to mentor someone doesn't take that much. It just says, the person just says, look, I'll invest time with you. Just read the Bible together. You don't even have to have all the answers. So church, we have an opportunity before us. We have an opportunity to become more like Jesus. We have an opportunity to partner with Jesus to see lives changed. And all we have to do is ask. It's all we have to do. I'm always asking, always asking, always asking. Do you know that I go through a Starbucks drive-through just about every Saturday morning or Sunday morning, very early? And I strike up a conversation with the baristas. Is that right? And what's a male barista? Right, whatever. I don't know if they're here today or not. And so, after several months, and I'm praying all the time, God open their hearts. And they know me when I'm around the corner, they say, "Hey, Pastor Brad." Just one day, one said, "Well, what are you doing today?" And I said, "Well, I don't really want to say." Because whenever I say something, I'm a pastor, they go, "Oh, well, let's change the subject." So I said one day, "Well, I'm a pastor of a church, and I'm getting ready to go for a time of prayer drive." And really? "Where do you pastor?" I said, "Well, South Hills, right down the road." "Really? Well, can I come?" I didn't even ask. Let me think about it. Not quite sure. So before very long, one came, then a second came, then a third came, and then yesterday the Lord had been laying on my heart something for a fourth one. And some of the ways that I evangelize is I write something down in a card, something that I feel like the Lord is laying upon my heart. It's a step of faith. So I wrote a card. I signed it because it's a young woman, so I signed it, Pastor Brad and Maureen, being wise, and I gave it to her. I haven't heard back from her yet. But that's 4 people through a Starbucks drive-thru, and they love coming to South Hills. You just never know what God will do.